started. So my name is Savita Baidu. I work for the Web Foundation, and thank you very much for coming tonight. We're hosting this as a kind of response and way forward to Claire and colleagues' reports on the UN data revolution findings report. So the agenda for tonight, I think you should all have a copy of the agenda, hopefully. We are going to have first a presentation from Claire, and I'm sorry you can't see the colleagues in Boston and DC at the moment just because we've got this presentation up on the screen, but as soon as we finish with the presentation, we'll be showing them from their locations. We have a hashtag data rep if you would like to tweet about it, and the Wi-Fi here is the Mozilla guest Wi-Fi, which doesn't need a code as far as I know. Thanks very much to Mozilla for hosting us. Sarah, our coordinator, is I think around the corner somewhere, who's helped us a lot in setting this up. So many, many thanks to her. And I think I don't know if Rachel and David, you'd like to introduce yourselves first, or? Yeah. I think, yeah, okay. So we'll switch to Tim and Misha, I think in Boston. Maybe we need this. Gabe, I think I need you up here for your last time. How do you switch to your? Yes. We just have a disembodied voice. Out there. Okay. All right. Tim, can you introduce yourself?
So hello to everyone, and hello to everyone also on the live stream. I'm Tim Davies from the Web Foundation Open Data in Developing Countries project, and here in Cambridge we've got a few members of the wider community who will briefly introduce themselves.
Sarah Watson, I'm a fellow at the Berkman Center, and I work on data and algorithms in public discourse.
Rob Farris, I'm the research director here at the Berkman Center. Chris Crawford, I'm at 2L at the law school, working on anti-corruption and open governance issues at the law school.
And Tim, would you like to introduce the colleagues in DC as well?
There's probably too many of us around the whole room, so maybe there's Misha.
Yeah, I'm Misha Belkindas from Open Data Watch, and I was asked to chair this thing if it will work. I hope it will. But we are here too many. We're about 15, so we won't be introducing ourselves, but we are happy to listen to what Claire has to say, and then we'll come back.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. I'll switch to the presentation now, and maybe Claire can come up here. Okay, I think I need to back up my laptop. I'm not a Mac user. Yeah. Yes, perfect. Yeah. Great.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's
oh, okay. Well, it's different here.
Yeah.
There's a little timer on the screen. That's good. Just in case you want to use it again. Okay. I don't know what point it stops. It's still showing 0. And then how do I just use the mouse to click through the slides? Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for letting me also thank you for coming. It's fantastic to have the opportunity. Ooh, it's strange.
Sorry, I've just switched off your bit of feedback.
Let's just go back to PowerPoint, shall we? And I'll just.
Sorry about that.
Okay, great. Okay, one of the first things that we all said in the group as we sat down together for our first meeting at the end of September was how bizarre and slightly disconcerting and in every way oxymoronic it was to be sitting as part of a UN committee on a revolution. It's possibly one of the most poorly named initiatives that any of us have been involved in. Nonetheless, it was great, and I'll tell you more about it in a minute. But I think because of this slightly odd naming and framing, it'd probably be useful to just talk for a couple of minutes about where it came from. As some of you in the room are hardened post-2015 watchers, and you will remember that the phrase "the data revolution" was used in a previous UN committee report that was released around the middle of 2013 by a high-level panel of which David Cameron was one of the co-chairs, along with the presidents of Indonesia and Liberia. And like all UN reports, it was very long and it had lots of good things in it, some of which have caught on and some of which have not, and you never really know. I've discovered if you're writing a report, which are the bits which are going to seize the imagination and which are the bits that everyone is going to forget about. But when from that previous report, one of the phrases and the ideas in that report that really did capture the imagination was this idea of a data revolution for development. That phrase then sort of mobilized a lot of thinking and ideas, and there was a sort of, I think, pulled together and crystallized for a lot of people some ideas that had been floating around for some time about the lack of data that existed relevant to many development issues, many groups of people, and the opportunities that exist now to do something about that. The Data Revolution Group, the Independent Expert Advisory Group on the Data Revolution for Sustainable Development, to give it its full name, was announced in August of this year, and we had a very short time to put it together. I started my role as the head of the Secretariat at the beginning of September, and we reported, it was almost exactly 2 months before we were in the Secretary General's office giving him the report. Everyone else in the UN is very nervous now, because now that we've demonstrated that it is possible to pull together a semi-decent report in 2 months, everyone thinks that that's what they're going to be able to do as well. So, the point of this really was to provide a focus within the UN system. For, on the one hand, there's this whole conversation going on about the data revolution that's got everyone very excited. On the other hand, there's a political, and at least within the UN, an institutional conversation going on about the SDGs, the post-2015 agenda, all kinds of new investments that might be made in that. And the question was really, what's the useful way of bringing these two things together? What do they mean for each other? That was essentially, in a nutshell, the terms of reference that we were given. And what I'm going to do now is just to very briefly summarise the report itself, what we came up with. And then I imagine, I'll talk a little bit about the content. I imagine that what we'll probably do for most of the evening is to talk much more about the recommendations and less about the analysis and more about the next steps. I hope we will anyway. So, is it scrolled forward to the next slide?
I think there's a down button.
Yeah, okay. So the first thing we felt that we should probably do, and the first thing in our terms of reference, in fact, was to try to find some way of explaining what this thing is called the data revolution. Obviously, lots of people have been talking about it for a long time, but in some ways the strength of the concept lay in the fact that there wasn't a very precise single definition, so lots of people recognise their own issues and their own concerns in that framing and could have a conversation together. So we didn't want to nail it down to a kind of single thing, but rather we could sort of describe what we thought, what the different parts that we thought together added up to the data revolution. And we thought really there were three core aspects to it that make it a revolution, rather than simply the gradual evolution of data collection methodologies, of statistical systems, and the things that we've seen since the Babylonians made their first census several thousand years ago. Three things we thought really sort of define what the data revolution is for us now. Supply. Obviously, we're seeing a huge increase in the volumes of data that are flowing and washing around the world, most famously from mobile phones and other kinds of technologies, but also all kinds of innovations going on with citizen-generated data, huge, much more perceptions data than we've seen before. It's not just about everyone using their mobile phones, there's all kinds of other stuff as well, together add up to a huge increase in the supply of data. Similarly, in parallel and not unrelated, I think the causality runs both ways, a huge increase in the demand for data. We're seeing a lot more interest in data. We're seeing, obviously, as many of you have been, absolutely in the thick of the movement for open data, and a sort of demand that more and more of what is produced should be available for the public, for people who want to see it and use it. The demand for data also, from the private sector, from governments to some extent, from a whole range of different organisations and individuals increasing the demand for data. And then, linked to these three, some exciting innovations that really speak to both demand and supply. A kind of huge amount of experimentation going on, again at all levels. This is about governments, this is about the private sector, this is about individuals sitting in their bedrooms playing on their computers, this is about citizens groups, a whole range of different organisations and individuals innovating so we can do a lot of new things that simply weren't possible anymore. I think one of the other things that we felt we had to sort of try to define in the group was why anybody needs to do anything about this. These are all just facts of things that are happening. But I think we felt that it would be helpful to provide an argument about kind of why any action is required, why you couldn't just let all this continue. It's great, things are happening, it's exciting, new things are happening, why not just sort of let it happen? Okay. We thought there were three kind of core things going on that meant that not that one would want to stifle any of what's going on already, but that you could get some extra values, some positive benefits from adding a layer of deliberate action to what's happening already. I think those are three things. First of all, invisibility. This is the famous, this is our way of talking about data gaps. This is something which has been around forever, and data now is a lot better than it used to be. It's slowly getting better, but it's still not good enough. And the question is whether any of this new stuff can be gaps in terms of what we know about people, gaps in terms of what we know about issues, gaps in terms of when we know things. We might know things, but we might only know about them 2 years after they've happened, which is much use if you're trying to actually run something. A second reason for action focused around the idea of inequality. First of all, existing inequalities in terms of what is known, who knows it, and who it's known about. Clearly, some people have access, some people, some governments, some private companies have access to much more data than others. And that leads to inequalities in people's ability to act, to make decisions, to monitor, and so on. But I think we felt that without deliberate action, given the speed of change and the huge number of new opportunities, that inequality would probably increase quite fast unless deliberate action was taken. And thirdly, the question of risk. And again, I think there are people in this room who probably know a lot more about this than I do. But there was a very strong feeling among some members of the group that it's not all just about benefits and all of us sort of strolling off into some shiny techno future. There are some big risks here. Some of the the risks that we've seen playing out in the UK media over the last few months, risks to privacy, risks to security, risks at a very basic level to some very fundamental human rights. You know, we all assume that knowing more about people is a good thing, but it also gives more power to people who want to do harm. So I think there are some very serious risks, again, which, if action weren't taken, could have two consequences. Could lead to harm, you know, of a very immediate and, you know, and serious kind. But also, if those risks, the perception of risk, the reality of risk undermines people's trust, then the potential benefits of data wouldn't be able to be realised. We saw that happen, for example, here in the UK with the whole discussion around care.data. That people, you know, who had a sense that there was a potential benefit from using data in a particular way, we were never able to even find out whether that was true because of the lack of public trust in how that data might be used and for what purpose. So I think there's a serious kind of immediate risk and a potential risk, an opportunity cost, if you like, of lack of trust. Why now? Again, any of these things could have happened at any point, and they can and maybe will happen, you know, maybe not now, maybe in 5-10 years' time. But I think this reflects the timing of the group. There is a specific political opportunity now. We are some part of the way through a political process within the UN to negotiate a new set of goals. This is a thing which, in a sense, has shone a light on the weakness of data for monitoring, and is also the thing which can potentially, you know, there is a financing framework attached to this discussion, there is a political and institutional framework attached to this discussion around data collection and use. There are some very specific opportunities here, both to improve the monitoring and the action around the new goals, which is important in itself, but also to use that as an opportunity to get improvements in data, which will have all kinds of other effects for all kinds of other people and institutions. So this is my final slide, what did we think, given, you know, what we saw as the opportunity?
I'm so sorry, Claire, but the listeners can't hear in DC and Boston. Would you mind speaking up a little?
Okay, well, shall I bring this a bit closer to my mouth? Does that help? Okay, so given what I've said about the sort of pre-existing problem, in the sense that you know, has existed for a long time, about the opportunity that exists, and also about the potential risks there and the reasons for action, what is it that we suggested in this group could be the sort of things that could be done? Now, a few caveats here. Clearly, this was a report that we were writing for the UN Secretary General, and, you know, and by extension for the whole of the UN system. So our focus, not exclusive, but our main focus was really on things that could be usefully done at a global multilateral level. It's not, we didn't see it in any sense as an exhaustive list. There are all kinds of other things that can and should be happening at different levels, but I think we felt quite strongly it's not really the business of the UN Secretary General to necessarily recommend specific improvements to the statistical service of any individual country or to the way in which any individual organisation manages its data. Rather, we were focusing much more on the things which are the legitimate business of that institution around global resource mobilisation, coordination, and so on. So you know, like many of these reports, again, and this partly reflects the nature of these kind of reports, and it partly reflects the time that we had available to write it, we ended up with a very long list of potential recommendations. And one of the interesting things that's happened, just saying to someone earlier, one of the interesting things that's happened since then, and I think will continue to happen, is a sort of process of, in a sense, a kind of market in those recommendations, which are the ones that are going to grab the attention and, in the end, to have traction, and what hierarchy is going to develop between those recommendations, in the sense that ones that come to stand for some of the others. That process is happening now, and I'm looking forward to the discussion later to kind of see how that falls out in this conversation. Essentially, we felt there were 4 kind of categories of things that needed to be done, and we had some specific ideas for each one. And clearly, top of the list has to be resource mobilisation and using those actual financial resources and other resource technological and human resources for capacity development and for, in a sense, overcoming some of these inequalities which I talked about at the very beginning. That's a very sort of tangible expression of those inequalities. As I said before, thanks to the process around the SDGs, we do have a conference coming up in July called Financing for Development, and I think, you know, one of the key decisions that has to be made is what we, you know, what people who care about this will be saying to and at that conference in relation to financing data, bearing in mind that lots and lots of people are going to be making claims about financing for all kinds of things. How do we situate that within that? I think we also felt, and this, you know, comes back to the role of the UN and/or other multilateral bodies, that there was something to be said. We might now be at a moment where some degree of international coordination and leadership in some areas is useful. Again, I was talking earlier to Laura about the area of standard setting. You know, we've had a sort of plethora of different standard setting initiatives, really helpfully, you know, people testing things out and seeing where things are going, and these are starting to sort of cluster around specific initiatives. You can see how at some point it could be useful to take those clusters and see what could be built from that in the way of some global standards and principles, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And again, it's partly about sort of leveling the playing field and making sure that people are playing, in a sense, by the same rules. There are other things, you know, that potentially one could think of that where there would be a global function. You know, some of the sort of public-private partnership elements of this might be better done at a global or a regional level, rather than, again, leaving every individual government or institution to negotiate an entire set of partnerships kind of on its own. There are lots of different ideas here. The third bucket of things was in the area of technology and innovation. And here I think there were two things we were sort of trying to achieve. Partly, again, this idea of sharing, you know, of trying to find some way of incentivizing and encouraging more sharing of technology. And again, to speak to this point about inequality and trying to level the playing field. And also around the sort of deliberate creation of global public goods, you know, so that there might be ways, if the public sector were to take more of a role in this, that one could incentivize, I don't know, the development of, you know, particular technologies that would solve particular problems that might not otherwise be created. We've seen some similar initiatives in the health field around creating incentives for particular types of medical research, for example. And you could imagine something analogous in the technological field. And again, there's probably advantages in scale if you're trying to do things like that. And the last thing is what we call quick wins, which is really about using the convening power of the UN and those other bodies who want to sort of be part of a coalition with that, and using the particular kind of political moment and urgency around the agreement of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, to make some things happen quickly and kind of stop talking about what's possible sometime out there in the future, what we could be doing, but really starting to show in very exciting ways what is happening. It's partly about putting together, aggregating, and making much more visible all the exciting things that are going on already, because there's a lot. And it's also about maybe, you know, using a sort of aggregation and a convening function to make that more than the sum of its parts, and really start to sort of demonstrate to people what's possible here and some of the very practical ways that we can actually use this. My worry is that if we don't do that, we end up sort of talking about process all the time, and eventually everyone just so I think those are the sort of 4 buckets. As you see in the report, there are sort of very specific ideas around that, but essentially those are the 4 areas where we think action is needed, and we had some very specific ideas there, which I guess now we're going to talk about. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Claire. My name is David McNair. I'm the One Campaign. I'm one of the co-facilitators of this session. Claire's talked about the fact that there's been a lot of fairly principles-based conversations, a lot of process-based conversations, and what this session is about is taking some of the recommendations in the report, taking ideas that you may have, and testing those and starting to think about the specifics that we might be starting to push in our advocacy through the SDG process, the UN Financing for Development process, and other fora where these discussions are happening. So I guess what we want to do in our time tonight is to think about the recommendations in the IAG report. I know that some people have had views on those, and they're kind of out there in open letters and so on, both on the process and the content. But this is about really looking at the next steps and where we go next. So I guess we have some framing questions that we think would be useful to kind of situate our discussion. The first is, how do we build on the IAG's work and have some clear ideas about what we do next? And starting with the vision for what we want to see. So if we are investing time and energy in this discussion, where do we want to be in November or December 2015? When the SDGs have been agreed, when we need a baseline for where we're starting with on all this stuff, and also where we use the political energy that is currently present around data to secure investments that haven't been made to date. So do we need a baseline for the SDGs? If so, how do we take that forward? How do we secure investments to improve development outcomes in specific countries, whether that be around civil registration and vital statistics, and the idea of leaving no one behind? How can that be credible if we don't know who everyone is? But also talking through the risks that Claire has highlighted, the risks around privacy, of data exacerbating inequality if only some people have access to that information, or if only some people have the education and skills to understand it and act on it. And so what we'll do is we'll use those framing questions. I'll just turn over to Boston and DC for their reflections on what Claire's presented. And then we're going to split up into groups in each of the rooms that we're in to brainstorm that vision and then really get down to some specifics. So what are the top 3 concrete policy objectives that we want to see in the next year? And if we don't know what the answer to that question is, how are we going to find out, and who's going to lead that process? And so it really is about kind of moving from principles to action. And then we will reconvene and try and test some of those ideas, and also think a little bit about the policy processes and the moments over the next year that we can use to bring energy and oxygen to those ideas, whether that be the World Economic Forum or the Financing for Development process or the UN Statistical Forum or whatever. So I'll not talk for any more time, but I will hand over initially to Boston to just share some very brief reflections on what occurred so far.
Hello, so Tim here in Boston. Unfortunately, we've not been able to hear the audio terribly well, so we're not going to give any feedback at this point, but we will join others on the live stream and elsewhere using the DataRev hashtag to discuss. So I'd like to hand over to DC to give us the main feedback from the remote sites.
Thank you very much. We cannot give a feedback on Claire's presentation because we didn't hear it, and it was very bad. We would be happy to give some feedback on the report, but what I want to say, it would be much better to do it after we have a discussion here, and I'm very much looking forward to this discussion because I'm probably the only one here who was involved in the statistical development for many years, but I am really very happy to have a completely different group of people and to see a perspective from the side of the civil society. So I will just stop here, and we will try to convey our messages probably either we will tweet, we will, yeah, but we will just turn off and start our discussion and try to contribute to the process. Thank you.
The lack of a clear signal coming through the Google Hangout. So we will now turn to splitting up into groups and kind of looking at these 2 issues. First about brainstorming our vision for where we want to be, and then.
So to everyone with us on the live stream, we apologise for the poor quality of audio we've had, and to those in DC as well. What we're going to do is split off into separate groups, and we'll make sure on the web page where you can find this live stream and blog later will be some of the reflections from the different groups. So please accept our apologies that we've not had the audio quality we wanted. And we're splitting off in separate groups. Those of you connecting remotely, the DataRev hashtag is the place to discuss these key questions on what actions do we need to bring about a post-2015 data revolution, and how do we get towards those over the coming months and years. So thank you all for joining us on this session.